It was well past midnight when the quiet rustle of leaves betrayed the tension rippling through the village of Nyakato in Uganda. Hunched behind thick reeds near a moonlit lake, a 64-year-old grandfather named Mz Okello clutched a wooden spear, his eyes scanning the darkness with relentless focus. Around him, scattered among the brush and tall grass, nearly 24 villagers crouched in silence, holding their breath. They had been out here for hours, and they were terrified, not just scared of what might come tonight, but of what had haunted them for nearly 15 years. Once Nyakato had been a place where children played barefoot by the lakeside, where elders gathered in open courtyards to share stories under the stars. But that ended in 1991, the year people began to vanish. At first it was a fisherman who didn't return. Then, a teenage girl disappeared on her walk home. Over time, the deaths stopped being isolated. They became a pattern. What was strange, no one ever found clear answers. Sometimes bodies would reappear near the lakeshore, horribly mangled. Sometimes they were never found at all. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some villagers blamed angry spirits, others whispered about curses, demons, or punishments from gods long forgotten, but no one could stop it. And by 2005, the death toll had reached 83. That was nearly 10% of the entire village. People accepted it, resigned to fate, superstition, or simply fear. Everyone, that is, except Mz Okello. To him, the deaths were not supernatural. They were methodical, they were brutal, and they were far too real to be the work of a ghost. He had lost friends, neighbors, even a grandson, and when another child disappeared just before dawn one morning in March, something inside him snapped. "This ends tonight," he said. So he rallied the others. Not all agreed, many were paralyzed by fear, but some, inspired by Okello's stubborn hope and hardened resolve. It was here that most of the disappearances had occurred. People went missing near this quiet bend in the lake, surrounded by tall reeds and eerie silence. Even animals avoided it, and hoping they wouldn't become the next victims. The first night passed slowly. No sounds but the occasional splash of a frog. Nothing stirred, no shadows moved. And as the orange sun broke through the trees the next morning, the group left disappointed but not discouraged. They came back the next night, and the next. 6 long nights of hiding, sweating, and holding back fear. Still, nothing happened. By the 7th night, morale was fading. But Okello had one last idea. "If it's hunting," he said, "then let's give it a reason to come." They gathered discarded animal organs from the village slaughterhouse: goat intestines, cow livers, anything with a scent, and strung them up from low tree branches by the lake. Then, they hid once more, eyes locked on the lake, ears tuned to every whisper of wind. Hours passed. Then, sometime between 4 and 5 a.m., they heard it. A low guttural rumble like thunder underwater. It began faintly, a distant hum from the lake, but it grew quickly, vibrating the reeds, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Okello's heartbeat raced. Then, in the dim pre-dawn light, ripples appeared on the water's surface. Something huge was approaching. A massive silhouette emerged from the water, black and glistening. What it didn't know was that Okello had set a trap. The bait was lined with iron hooks, buried deep in the flesh. As the creature bit down, it thrashed violently, but the hooks held firm. It was stuck. Okello wasted no time. Within minutes, 50 villagers descended on the butchery with ropes, machetes, and spears. And as they gathered around the struggling beast, the truth was finally revealed. It was no demon, no spirit, no ancient curse. It was a crocodile, but not just any crocodile. This monstrous reptile measured over 16 feet long and weighed more than 2,000 pounds. It was the largest saltwater crocodile ever captured in Uganda, and it had been stalking the lake for over a decade. Authorities arrived later that morning, stunned by what they saw. But to the villagers, it wasn't about records or headlines. It was about closure. For the first time in 14 years, Nyakato slept peacefully. The crocodile was relocated to a protected wildlife reserve. But in that village, deep in the heart of Uganda, elders still speak of the nights by the lake, and the man who refused to surrender to fear. The icy winds howled across King William Island, as a group of Inuit hunters trudged through waist-deep snow, their boots crunching over the frozen landscape. It was April 1848, and the Arctic sun hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the desolate coastline of northern Canada. The hunters had set out that morning in search of seals. Food was scarce this time of year, and the men had climbed to the crest of an ice-covered hill to survey the frozen sea beyond. But what they found instead would change the course of Arctic history. The youngest among them reached the top first. He stopped dead in his tracks, eyes wide. Behind him, the older hunters climbed quickly to join him, spurred by the look of shock on his face. Together, they stared silently at the coastline below. It wasn't animals they saw, it was people, roughly 40 of them. Strange, pale-skinned men, kunot as the Inuit called them, were marching slowly along the icy shoreline in a silent, unsettling procession. But these men didn't move like survivors. They stumbled, shivered, and jerked unnaturally, as if their limbs were no longer entirely under their control. Their faces were sunken and lifeless, with skin the color of bruises. Their ragged clothes hung off skeletal frames. Their eyes were blank, empty, and then there was the sled. Behind the group, a few of the men were dragging a large wooden sled across the ice. It was covered with a dark tarp, and whatever was beneath it was heavy. The hunters could only guess what it contained. Then, suddenly, a scream. One of the pale men let out a bone-chilling howl. He twisted violently, collapsing into the snow. The rest didn't even glance his way, except the sled pullers. They stopped, calmly uncovered the tarp, and with methodical ease, lifted the screaming man's now limp body, and added it to the pile beneath the tarp. Then they covered him again, and the march continued. The hunters didn't wait to see more. Silent with dread, they ducked below the hill and ran back toward their village. What they had seen, they couldn't explain. The spirits, maybe, or sickness, or worse. Back in their village, the community gathered to discuss the incident. After hours of debate, the consensus wasn't fear, but compassion. These men, said one elder, are starving. The way they moved, the collapsed man, the dragging of bodies, all signs pointed to one thing. Desperate men trying to survive. And so the hunters, despite their fear, returned to the coast the next day, this time with arms full of seal meat. Their plan was simple: offer food, offer peace, maybe even help. But when they reached the hill and looked down, the shoreline was empty. No men, no sled, no movement, only snow. They followed the tracks, footprints in the snow and the long scar of the sled's path for miles. Eventually, the trail led to an abandoned campsite near the edge of the ice. There, a fire had long since gone out. Scattered tools and cooking supplies lay in the snow, including a large metal pot resting over the cold ashes. Strangely, no one was there. No body, no footprints leading away, just remnants of life. And then, silence. One of the hunters approached the pot. He gripped the lid, lifted it, and then recoiled in horror. Inside was a human skull, split open, its interior hollowed out, as if someone had been eating the brain. What had these men become? Weeks passed, then months. The hunters continued to search the coastline. Eventually, they found them, or what remained of them. Scattered across a shallow grave near the ice, they found the skeletal remains of over 30 men, white men, frozen in the snow. Most had collapsed along what appeared to be a makeshift trail. Their bodies bore signs of exposure, starvation, and mutilation. The hunters knew, with grim certainty, that these were the same men from the coast. Word spread slowly, and then a new plan formed. If these men were gone, if their camp and ship had been abandoned, perhaps their vessel was still out there, unclaimed, full of supplies. And so, later that year, the Inuit hunters set off again, this time heading out across the frozen sea. And there it was, a massive wooden ship, lodged in the thick Arctic ice, its hull perfectly intact, towering silently above the white expanse. The hunters scaled the frozen side and stepped aboard, expecting a wreck, but what they found was something far stranger. Below deck, the ship was pristine, beds with sheets and pillows, a library filled with books, games, tools, even a stockpile of fine china, and most shockingly, a fully stocked pantry, cans of food, untouched, preserved, left behind. The hunters were baffled. Why had these men abandoned shelter? Why had they left food, warmth, and safety, to die in the cold? It would take over 130 years to uncover the answer. In the 1980s, researchers examined the remains of the men found on King William Island. They identified them as members of the Franklin expedition, a famed group of British explorers sent to chart the Northwest Passage in 1845. The expedition had vanished. Until now, the truth: the canned food they'd been relying on had been contaminated with lead during manufacturing. As the men consumed their rations, they slowly poisoned themselves. Lead exposure caused disorientation, delirium, and severe mood swings. Eventually, it drove them mad, starving, hallucinating, and slipping into psychosis. The men abandoned their ship, leaving food and supplies behind, and wandered into the Arctic wasteland. There, they died, cold, confused and lost. That sled, it wasn't for burials. It was a mobile food source. And that pot on the fire, the skull inside, was real. To this day, fragments of the Franklin crew are still discovered beneath the snow of King William Island, frozen in time, lost to history, and remembered only by the echoes they left behind in the minds of those who first saw them stumble out of the wilderness like ghosts.